Recording in progress.
Idam Guru Adna Mandalakam Deviya Taya Me.
Where? Maha. Oh, yeah. Oh, that is. And the power of it, because you said something out. That is, that don't be sure. The dog on me, that's no, yeah. Oh, that's in what. Oh, Gombo do be strongly. Quand she send it and jet by sa. Quand she send it and jet by and you chabar chiba. Quand she mirror the cerebellum balance. Quand she say, Joe quand she wa. Koran, Sergei, Neshi, and Rebushi Mamu, Bushachi, quand she send Rebushing his chatting the Shipay. Quick Haku Yamara, Koran Kabayana, did Sachimbu Hamagocha. Quand she send it in Zitaba, New Jedisora. Nenju Chagwa Juba Jusatachi, Sarasur Lusa Ken Lusa Sasha. Quand she send it, Joe Kanshira, Serkin, Rambuchi Tapis, that Yogish. Quand she send it, Jabba, Yamba. Quand she say no, Nenju Chagwa. Nenju Juba Kalamamusan Manson Martin Juba Sivada. Juba Josada Ken Lusarota Sarasha. Nenju Chagwa Jiba. Kashi Miru Chen Tibata. Jibat in the cerebellum balance. O Teleja. Mikora Chore, Rindan, Ticket, and then Bahamago, Kotawasi, Tamatuchi Sasara, or Tipe Sidamong, but a Pambushita, Diligence, Milikene, and it's Landur She, Tendrida Medra, Chica, Venetia, Hako, Tilesi, Tanda, Mizidi Tiposhe, Yamatuja Tiposhe, they then get the Telejan Lumber. Kashi Miru Chen Tipata Kibatan, Rebel, that's it. But to shoot at Tilahagu Milumba, Kuba Nashi.
As taught by the master Nagarjuna, he says, whoever uses a golden vessel adorned with jewels as like a receptacle for their vomit, someone who, having a human birth, uses it for non-virtue is even more stupid than that. So imagine if there was someone who had like a golden vessel, very valuable, adorned with all kinds of gems and jewels, but they don't really know what they have. They're just sort of using it to like vomit into or as like a trash receptacle. So someone who maybe they're very poor and they could really use that sort of valuable thing, but really not knowing what they have, they just use it, either set it aside or use it for something totally unacceptable, like for vomiting into. But whoever is, say, that person we would see as being stupid, but whoever has been born as a human and has this kind of life wherein we can distinguish between virtue and non-virtue. It's superior to an animal rebirth. But whoever uses this kind of life to engage in non-virtue, that is the most stupid that you could be, the most foolish that you could be, even more so than like a very poor person who has found such a valuable object and uses it poorly. We have this kind of human rebirth, and if we use it for non-virtue, that's basically the most foolish we could be.
Rinpoche Kyankyun Bungyu Tongyu Kandechi na Teleja Lakwa Susu Military Ese Rawa Nogu Rinpoche Kasin Roswa Mangbo Soa Damne Tsendi Chik Sengwe Nemele Soba Kangat Raju Nge Molam Tabu Tende Rinpoche Chi Rabo Inaya Teleja Lakwa Res Kendi Ngarazo Military Chola Tangyo Amares Tenda Meba Tana Ani Pansi Midu Suwara Mili Zachin Butanda Shivish Tuye. So she penjur which thought she congress and akas, pambals, a simdish desera. Susan made it Zachin with the Kyo together to the Pechuche, Sambuchivity, Majiviche. Tawasi made the Trolatan Tibura Satus, Trolatan Botalia, Pansi Mabati, Shiratini, Loveris Gordo. The Rindanchin Buim Bachete. Rindanchin was to send the Kibutan Dasio Send it on the red, send Diliaco. Champagne that give up a person so much as Chawa Sambuche, a Pechuche, Kugaviora. Tundra Vicinity, how Makozanti, Messiah, the Tonet and Jason, Tidi Mato Shanda, Kasham, some Koeke or Marwa. Sangaraz and Milide, Tundra and Kebrajive, 2 years on Budua. Tundra Kuranjo Saya, Tonet, Togure, parts of Drochi. Taratinia, the Chonchi Toto Chigra. I didn't understand any Kavamacho Desongara. But as I said to it, Toguish message so some changes also. Don't do the Chibarich, don't do Saratu. Trumo, Shendo got to take Kashaya treat. The other Congress Saratu, Charge and Mother. The Kavas Machora. Or the Indico Kavayabacho Desongura. Yeah.
So therefore, this human life that we have right now is extremely valuable. We should view it as such, like however many sort of hundreds of thousands of jewels we might have, like even if you had a wish-fulfilling jewel that could give you whatever sort of things, possessions you might want, our life that we have right now is even more precious than that. But we tend to, when we say lose a little bit of material wealth, we feel this sense of loss, like, oh, how did I lose that? Whereas we don't feel the same way normally about just sort of wasting our time, using our life in a way that is not virtuous or that is not sort of recognizing its value. So here, instead of that, we should recognize that our life, our precious human rebirth, is even more valuable than a wish-fulfilling jewel that could like give us wealth or something like that. We have the chance to benefit others, to engage in virtue with thinking beyond just this life. So we have conditions superior to, say, an animal. We shouldn't just sort of waste away our time going here and there and feeding ourselves and kind of taking care of ourselves without thinking about what we're doing. I mean, that's nothing superior better than an animal who kind of eats, they go around, they don't have anything that they're really thinking about. And we shouldn't waste away our life like that, just sort of eating and staying here and there and not having any thought, because the precious life that we have right now has capacities much superior to the rebirth of, say, an animal. We should take advantage of this and use it to actually engage in virtue.
Nó không có nhìn xa thấy rộng, cái khả năng của nó cũng không có trí tuệ như con người, cho nên nó chỉ biết sống với bản năng, làm thế nào để có được thức ăn và nước uống, làm thế nào để có đi chỗ này chỗ kia để chăm sóc và bảo vệ những thân bằng quyến thuộc của chúng. Cho nên chúng ta cái thân người rất là quý báu, với lại cộng với cái sự thông minh của loài người thì mình làm thế nào để cái con người mình khác với cái loài vật, không những chỉ là để sống một cuộc sống để thỏa mãn ăn uống và chỗ ở thôi. Khi loài vật thì nó cũng có cái chỗ ở, cái hang, cái động của nó ở, là cái ngôi mình khác với mình. Con người chúng ta chui vào ngôi nhà đẹp hơn, cũng có những thức ăn ngon hơn, vân vân. Nếu mình làm thế nào để không sử dụng cái thân người mà sống để khác biệt và được lợi ích nhiều hơn loài vật, thì chúng ta chỉ thỏa mãn những cái nhà cửa, những cái thức ăn, rồi những cái cuộc sống đời này, thì chúng ta không có khác mấy với những cái loài vật.
어디 내시 산지에 송거도 산지 지된 감을 줘야 돼. 그러니까 산지는 용화 됐어요. 지된 감들이야 되는 대화용에 전달이야. 아니 대외에서라. 최대한 받에 대외도 나르스. 이 대화 컨디션 그래서 팀부치에 대해서는 대화용 그래서 거도 산지는 용화 됐어. 천딜에 대화용 거를 교치마 대화용 거라. 미소디 교치마스 다른 무시하게 돼. 제야데 제야데 상주다 면주 빠이데 천딜이고요라. 이게 그 천딜에 팽겨와래. 딘제부 남이 딘제부스라 남이 계신제부 계셔와데 마음바나 껴요라. 단다 소소 대화용 거로 마음바나 대화용 거래. 어디 단단히 산제더니 지대 감을 전이 최소배 있어라. 최대한 봐야 대화했어. 근데 대화에서 컨디션 그것은 튜브에 와서 낭미나다. 소바이나다, 롱바이나다, 계거이나다. 강가 튜브지 되면 안에 대화용 거라. 튜브 매니저질에는 처와지는 곳을 살아. 지질 처와지는 기후가 말아 강가지 용구로 투구로. 그러니까 튜브 대화데 튜브지 되면 내가 가리나 디치도 그래서 낭미를 지나서 내가 강가하고 버르체 튜브 연안에 내가 있어서 또 그제 내가 가르치는 시도 그랬어라. 소바이나 그런 메뉴를 가리나 내가 강가 줍도 그랬어. 튜브 남지 가도 돼서. 그래서 내가 제때 내던 강가하고 줍도 그랬어. 야.
So, likewise, the Buddha's coming to the world is for happiness. The Buddha's teaching of the Dharma is for our happiness. So here, the Buddha is the source of our happiness in that by following the teachings of the Buddha, by avoiding non-virtue and engaging in virtue, this is what helps us in this life. It helps create sort of peace in this life, as well as bringing a ripening result of happiness in the future. So the Buddha came to the world in order to bring that happiness through the teaching of the Dharma. And really, this happiness comes from abiding in harmony, living in harmony. So when we live in sort of harmony, we are able to accomplish whatever aims we might have, whether we're talking about our family or a group, a society. When there is strife, when you don't have that kind of harmony, it leads to sort of harm against one another, fighting, and we aren't able to accomplish what we want. But when we live in harmony, we are able to accomplish whatever sort of goal we might set out to, whatever sort of work we want to do, we are able to do by having that kind of harmony. So we should recognize that at its most basic, the Buddha's coming and the Buddha's teaching are the source of happiness that we ourselves have to implement in this life, and it will bring benefit in this life as well as ripening results in the future.
Trong một cái cộng đồng thì cái cộng đồng hòa hợp thì công việc gì chúng ta cũng có thể giải quyết được. Cho nên khi mà sống với nhau làm thế nào chứ không tổn hại mà có thể sống chung vui hòa hợp với nhau, đó là cái hạnh phúc đầu tiên của những người con Phật có được.
뭐야? 어디 다 된다고 말하지 메시지 토바데. 이거 맞아요. 개어 주변에 계신 분이 성도. 이거 지금 메시지 산지 좀 된 대표네. 최송의 랍지송의 전달들이 있어라. 이거 지금 메시지 개어 무슨 소발체스. 랑게 셈네 용선도 되는 산지 때문에 성도. 영화 예수님 관에 시한을 써야 되고 지금 메시지 개와 팽버주에 개와 표슴 속과시 네 소소 셈된 되고 알아 최최스도 셈되고라 셈디 소주게 전달 셈비 삼릉에 버서만 요르다 라와 상부상마 야려 야게다 시제내주 마시베나 몽버데 파세주 시제내주 랑도르기 내주 야부주수 셈버치 탑대 시랍스다 상부다 신인이지라 어떤이야야 예당선에 소소티 란다 신강게 전달 주고요다 자 대과 지하면 자식 교합에서 서고지 랑게 셈네 용선 든디는 산제 템바에서 그래서 산제 템바단제에서 템바단제에는 소소티 바바 교합도 셈리아 도선 교환도도나 안 산제 템바단제에 팬도라 셈리 교합게 마치나는 karma kar시나 그 팬도요 말에 소디 셈디에 전달아 랑게 셈네 용선 든디는 산제 템바에서 그다 야
So here, therefore, we've obtained this human rebirth, and we should therefore not do any non-virtuous actions and engage in only virtuous actions, as the Buddha himself has taught. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So here, really, this we should not do any kind of negative actions with our body, speech, and mind toward others, and instead we should try to strive to engage in only positive, beneficial actions with our body, speech, and mind. I mean, the Dharma really, again, is about changing our mind, taming or subduing our mind, getting rid of any sort of bad and negative thoughts, and developing those kinds of good, positive, kind thoughts toward others, as well as developing our knowledge, those things that we don't know. We have to investigate in order to come to an understanding and develop our wisdom. So really, we talk about method and wisdom, the sort of side of developing good kind-heartedness, as well as developing our learning. And that is really the way in which we benefit from the Buddha's teachings. We talk often about having met the Buddha's teachings, but really the benefit comes from having worked on our mind, having made some kind of difference in the way that we act with our body, speech, and mind, eliminating those negativities and developing our positive qualities.
Xấu ác thì chúng phải loại bỏ và làm cho tâm mình càng ngày càng lương thiện và thanh tịnh hơn.
Moi thì phải sợ điều mà được chứ. Moi đi xuống giờ ta tìm bằng học kéo chủ về thì cái chuyện bây giờ xuống cái đó. Moi đi ta tìm bằng đi so thì nằm dùng ở chỉ cho nằm rồi đi. Mình nhầm đồ đi cái chế đi nè đó xem cái xem lúc tăng đi nè đó điều ngay cái chỗ bây nè đó thì đi sang lấy cái so cái đó. Mà ra rồi chỉ cho nằm rồi đi cho xem chuyện đến đó chỉ đi nào đó cái thằng mà rồi. Cái ghép con đó thì chỉ 이때 용기하라. 때문에 명상제 겹쳐서 탐무살 지 대바연도 지으라. 어디 만들을 성도. 산제 좀 된 데가 성도. 심지어는 내가제 에는 알이야 되니 겹쳐서 가버지도 때 가르에나 성도하라. 심지어는 내가제 에는 산제리야 겹쳐서 대바지도 성도라. 산제 대바지에 개발망볼이야 심지어는 저와 펜버도 Shandu Bashite, and it under a Shandu and out to the Jebashane, Sanji Capsule Sigara. A teen Sanji Combati, Simjili saw about Pember to get each on a Tarchimber Keranchi Pay Abudese, gave a mambo sonam Tindri Kalika, that on the Tarshin, Tanda Simject and Zagorsi, teaching on the Tabaki, Kawaki, Ichiwiara. Mother de Sanji and Sanji said, Tazing each other to Kawachi Maro. A tinico Simjelis or Sanji, so editi Masungua. Shell saw about the Pemberton when you know doing Yeshara. Shanju Semdan Yuji Chambuda, Tunito Bashir, Champagne, Tondalia, Zawa Quares, Tombani Tona, and asking and issue Champagne, Tondalia, T. Pengres, Tezuganga, Champagne and Draw Shiziro. 동반이 광고에서 소소케치 시부지 경강의 용사 자와의 티리스티파 매서였던데 동반이 광고를 선거도 에 잠바다 인지세로 어디서 강가 어디 던달을 되어라 뒤에 가서라 이 최대 대발 랩고 요삼 뒤삼고도 thì ngàn chú sâm cái mà rồi cho sẽ khăn đưa lên đây chỉ ngàn chú sâm cái đây chăm lên đây chỉ thế thì chỉ rồi nó lấy đi thì cái cái mà đó na thành đời mà rồi người gì lúc trong trẻ rồi cái gì sẽ nhẹ chứ thì lúc trong trẻ rồi đó ta bây giờ trẻ người này đi chỉ rồi nó đi ta năng mi đến nhầm đồ thế rồi nó sinh viên nhập phát sinh đi thì bây giờ sẽ đó nhưng mà tôi tin nhẹ đi họ nhẹ thì đi ra nằm yêu khỏi để xem na cái cái mà cho ra ở thì chỉ sao tụi nó sẽ cái chuyện bộ sẽ cũng đó chỉ cho nó đi ra mà ya sẽ chỉ hiện tại chỉ ya chỉ tôi chỉ thôi ya có mà na rồi rồi chẳng hạn chỉ để ra chỉ đấy thì mình bây giờ thì số số chỗ ta chỉ cho nó để đi ya不行呢ya rồi đấy còn đến đây ya rồi người ta đến đây trên rồi xong chỉ lấy cái đó thì chỉ là nó được.
So abandoning non-virtue and accumulating virtue is really important. That's sort of the core of the practice. So here we need to think about when we are with others, when we go out in society, how it is that we are speaking to others, how we are thinking, how we are acting towards them. So if we just sort of say like, oh, I'm a practitioner, but then we go out and we act sort of as we would before, we fight with others, we get angry, and then we go home and we sort of put our hands together and say, oh, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. That's really not a way to actually practice. When we hurt sentient beings, there is no way that we can please the Buddha. We can't think that we are somehow we go out, we live our life, we just act how we want to act, and then we come and we say, oh, I'm going for refuge, and we please the Buddhas by doing that. But rather, the intention of the Buddhas is to benefit beings, to abandon harming beings. And it's actually through the path that the Buddha came to the culmination of those qualities of having completely abandoned harming others, having abandoned all lack of knowledge, and developing all of these good qualities in order to be able to work for the benefit of beings. So if we admire the Buddha, we should want to traverse that same path. And the Buddha has asserted non-harm, has asserted that we need to benefit others. That is his intention, and he has brought that to perfection. So when we engage in things like attitudes of generating bodhicitta and compassion and the realization of emptiness, this needs to be with that kind of intention to benefit others. If we study things in order just to grasp more at a self, like, oh, well, I know emptiness, and that actually ends up increasing our sort of ego-grasping and self-grasping, that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of engaging with the teachings is in order to change our mind. If, again, we just sort of act how we want to act in society, and then we come and we say prayers and we say, oh, I go for refuge, but we don't change how we act, then we really have not benefited in any way from the Dharma, and we're certainly not pleasing the Buddhas. So we need to watch how it is that we use our body, speech, and mind when we are with our family, when we are with others in society. This is the whole purpose for learning these things. If we learn all of these things, but then sort of don't pay attention to the lessons when we go out into society, there's no real benefit to that. There's no real sort of Dharma practice. If we're just sort of like doing something on the cushion, but then when we go out into society, nothing changes about how others appear to us or how we interact with them, we're really not benefiting from the teachings. So I think it's very important that we recognize at its the fundamental need to abandon non-virtue and accumulate virtue through paying attention to what we are doing with our body, speech, and mind when we are out in society interacting with others. This is really important.
Và cải hóa cái tâm thức của mình càng ngày càng tiến bộ, càng ngày càng trong sáng, càng ngày càng lương thiện. Cho nên có người khác tu học họ đang tiến triển và họ càng ngày càng tốt ra, thì mình cũng phải thực hành giống như họ, chứ không phải chúng ta học bao nhiêu mà cũng không thay đổi gì cả. Thì như vậy mình không có nhận được cái lợi lạc từ cái việc học pháp.
어디 시에도 가르치고 있으나 Tambu de ale so so ke chimbu yin ya. Ngara zo nam sang ta be shen chi be ta che to ma do. So so ke che de so so nam ke che de o ke chimbu yin de de se. Yin na shen le chawa ma che so do. So so ke chimbu yin ba che so so tan da tu ye ta kang ye se tan da shen le chawa chen de ma re se tambu de u da. Chune pemba tu ma tu na neba ma che se. Neba chen po ju de le tu ngai yong gre se. 동해 대 소소대 집어를 세대 삼려도 자 자와세 대 잠바다 자와세 들 시지도 잠바세대 두고 맞추 나와서 되라 자와세 되라 잠바세도 대화다 체대다 이도 와서라 배 떠디는 메카시 두자를 되어 미디어 아부요 말다 싶다고도 되고 잠바매로 영어 그 잠바 그 메고 대완들 동해를 맨들어서 다다한테 아부를 집하다고라 주나야 딜도 가서라 Tini kibu dingi kapsu ni tagarwa. Te rangli shen kesho, namba tamje ni shenben kesho, chanchu simba na shi chitu yo mara, rang kesho ra. Ta ina ako, susu kesho wa ina te, susu tewa tuye kange se, lungba ina, chiso ina, kari ina ti, kesho wa inba che susu. Ina ti tandali shen liya, susu tandali shen dal neba che di ma chi sumda. Shen li tsawa pangu resi. rāng tōndā tu rāng kē chīmbu chī rāng kē tōndā rāng chī chī na ya tāma tāma tu lé nē tāng bē shēng chī pā sē rāng kē chī shū chī tē tāng bū nē chī tōndu tā kāng kā lī yō rē kē wā tōng mā mē bā nē chī 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 yōng bā rē tī kē tū wē kia mā tō yā kē chōng yō mā rē tāndā pā tō tā tī chī bū jā gu rē sē sām lū kō rā bē tāndā bē chī bū jā gu rē sē nē tā shēng chī wā sē tī yōng bā tō tāndā pā tō sām lū tā yā kā kā nō rā chā rē tā ngōne samlu te tīre tā tākshēn chē rē rāng lē shēn chē bā tsē tē shēn kē bā mē bā ngā dzū khōn dzū sē mē bā tē wā ndū lē tō ngē yin bē sim chē yin chē sāma lē chē bā rē pā tā tā chē wā tāma tāma tē kī wū chēn bē samlu lē tū tē lē kī tō wā wā tē yin tū ngā rā dzū wā chē nē kī shēn lē pēmbā chūp tō nē pēmbā chūp mā tū nā sō sē tōndā sō sē yā bū chē kī nāng mī tōndā yin dā lōng bē tōndā yin dā tsō bē tōndā yin dā tē tōndā lē shēn dā lē yā tsō wā mē chē sē tē tā kū kī tō wā tī chūne nī sāngye sūmbā nā shī pāngā chā ngā tsū yā dhruya ngō rī sū yā rā tī lā nī dhī rī tī rī samlō tī nī rā rīpa chā chā samlō tā nī thār sāngye kya kō sē yuñ dē kūndī kī kīpū sim chā tam chā lī ngī rī mē bā tēn thār sūmbā trūp tōng kē kī kāng sā chā chā kō yō sam tī tōndā lī yā nī sāngye kā rī sōng tō sāngye kō rā kī yā lām shī nī kāndī kāndī nā tō tī sōng yā rī Tezu nganzo nye na ngarangi ngo tsu ni ya rimji tinte chen zhuwa ni san kia pa chi ngi sa ti tanda che ngi yu sam na ni kia wa lab chenpu sa gira ti memba che tawa sa ma te sha ni kata kadu tso yu sam ti che na ni kia wa shida yung mar to kia wa li ya kulung ki wangi kia wa sa mabu yu ra lega chikpa yi na kulung ki wangi kia wa dhruya yu ra kashe kulung ki wangi lega chikpa chi yu na kulung ki samlu tanda wangi tikpa cha gira Lega chikpa yina kashi kulung samlu sambutani lega chibne kewa chagi wara. Sa kewa liya ngōnyi ki kewa si rangshin kewa chik. Kulung wangi kewa juge. Lungma ten juwa tindi o tindi kulung ki keshimbari ti wara. O tindi kulung setam ni sambar shus tindi raya.
So, to sort of summarize, we talk about the being of a small, middling, and great scope. And so here, when we begin, we sort of train our mind in stages, beginning with the sort of attitude of a being of small scope. We're not yet ready to, say, exchange our self-cherishing for cherishing others. We still hold ourselves as important, our family, and so forth. But we recognize that we shouldn't harm others. If we can't benefit them, at the very least, we should refrain from any sort of harm toward them in the pursuit of our own aims, because harming others brings about suffering, and they are just like us. They are just like me in that they don't want to suffer either. So this kind of wish of, or this recognition of others as having suffering and wanting happiness just like us, even if we are still sort of focused on our own goals, goals, we can give up harming others. And we need to learn to have this sort of attitude where we can see them with a kind of affectionate love. Often when we see someone, we think like, oh, that's a bad person. Like, we don't want them to be happy. We don't want to alleviate their suffering. So we need to get rid of that kind of attitude. But again, this is just the beginning sort of level, and moving beyond that, of being a middling scope, they can see the benefit of having this attitude of altruism, or of wanting to bring happiness for others and alleviate their suffering, but not to the level of a bodhisattva. They want to see, say, things alleviated with societal troubles and so forth, sufferings of beings, but they aren't taking on the responsibility themselves. So even though they are sort of pursuing their own goal, they too have a recognition of the importance of love and compassion, and abandoning harming others and working for their benefit. But at the level then of the being of great capacity, we get to really exchanging that kind of self-cherishing attitude for cherishing others. We see that since beginningless time, we have been pursuing our own sort of self-cherishing, but that really hasn't gotten us anywhere. Up until now, we have just been following that kind of mistaken path, and we need to change. Again, there is no difference between others and ourselves in not wanting to suffer and wanting to have happiness. And so we should then, at this level, take sort of responsibility, not just thinking like, oh, well, I'll help if I can, but and not do any harm, but also sort of taking on that I will do this. And so this is the way in which we train the mind in stages, from that very basic foundation of do no harm to others and benefit if you can. And so when one gets to the level of a being of great capacity, wanting to be able to affect the benefit of all other sentient beings, you strive to gain that state of Buddhahood, wherein you have eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, in which you know all of the points to teach of the path. And so for that purpose, we should think we are going to listen to these teachings. We are going to accumulate virtue and purify our negativities for that purpose. And so really setting this intention is something that is incredibly important, because the motivation, the intention, really determines the amount of virtue that we accumulate. There's a great benefit to setting this kind of intention, because there can be two people doing the same work, doing the same thing, but based upon their intention, that work could be non-virtuous or it could become virtuous. So our sort of, I mean, there are actions that are naturally non-virtuous or virtuous, but really our intention determines the power of things. And we should therefore take the time to really set a proper intention in order to gain the greatest benefit from, say, listening to the Dharma or any virtuous activity.
Vì lợi ích cho tất cả chúng sinh, cho nên con muốn đạt được vị Phật để là con nghe cái bài pháp này để thực hành.
Nói ta được sao? Ôi, thằng nào đi khởi sự lên sao? Ta khởi sự, ôi đi chơi bời rồi đó, chơi bời đi. Đi nào là đó, chơi bời nào, xem xem bao nhiêu người chơi bời hiện tại nào là xem xem bao nhiêu người đó. Xem xem bao nhiêu chơi bời rồi đi chơi bời. Pala chönya te chikpa chönshwe surchile. Ina semsamba ka songa re sikdo. Kyuma tabu she na yang sete. Nga zu uma tenju wa she na, she tamche rangwe ne meba, rangwe ne tongba, she kari ne rwa. Rangi ngwe tuba sikdo, kura ngwe ne su, rangwe ne tuba yoma, tangbu taal de chana, yakshu re te wara, tangbu taal meba, susu re chana, she te yor, hako te yor. Chidar choji dagan dushini shiba dishi kunla lochas. Susu samlutan tongba. Ani shenda kansa shenda samlutan. Ani cho tamjar pa rinjini chikba re de ora. Tongba nil ko. Chujen kaka che ma do tongzu li chikba chigyan re de ora. O de tambu susu kanla samlutan ge ora. De kyuma dabu shen se de susu dabu china ko rangwi ne nga rangi ye samsa. Rangwa chi samlu ko udwa. Grama inge pumbunga bula teni pa tasha bacham te du nyonge chingi samsa tenro chik madwa sobu pa sha sem pa sha na sosu chik yonanda jishag dwa tanda nga zu miche te de lu dan sem jene ma do kansa sosu chuk tu marwa sosu mirwa 근데 소보다 미 삼로다 미 소보를 뜻인들네 아니 미차오라 어디에서 않고 소보다 셈다 대술은 되네 소소 간사샤오르 미차오르 마도 계속 바샤는 미치 용해지 요마로 이나 나라도 삼로 코다나 시체나 나라가 여사 리바샤 셈바샤 소아바샤니 단대지 나를 셔도 로가치 로소 텐데 되고 말아 뒤에는 랑원에요 봤어도 라와지니 와래 현대할 때 신경질 거 말해 나랑 게 아이도 코로나 집고 용도 그 현대 로봇 팀을 거디샤 현대 로봇 팀고 매나니 가봐요스네 딱서봐 제서봐서도 다 딱제시나 그 가봐요스 제주다나 이라예지요 그래 디마르 어다 다디 디레샤세 랑원에 주 라예지 거리티요 말해 풍부가버리네 소부 차셰간 거 라웨 다마레 제네라이나 셈기 차셰간 거 다마레 소안 두시를 소버테서 다마레 딜레 로스야 풍부가부 가면 그 로스 다지요 말에 뒤에는 소부기 차와체다 셈기 삼로 땅에다 싸는 저 맹갱이 다지요 그라 아니 르다 셈기 차와체부터 간가 다기 차와 마셔셔 다들 랑이 대샤게 롱제 맹게 레사의 맹게 코코 로가 소소다 전다시 맹게를 다시 자유구도 근데 제 생마라 르지 자와치도 다가 자와치바 셈비소와 때도냐도 다가 녀와시 샤고를 마도 때다가 맹매 배 로가시 샤임도 어디 되자 담보 슈남 랑위네 라와 랑게 뭐 주바라는 나오는 시 템버리어 봐서라 엄마 봐서나 슈남 템버리어 봐 랑위네요 봐 랑신지요 봐 랑게 뭐요 봐 텐데지 메신도 텐데 여봐 통고와라 그 통고에서 규모다부 서와라 엄마 tenju와르시나 라 최강강 가지고 봤다지 랑위네 주바시 통대요라 랑위네 주바 통신도 랑위네 주바 뭐베 내술레 텐데시 요 말와 메두자 규모다부래 서와라 규모경기 지투셔도 따다 발란다 셰간다 개바다 페멜로 소바 주베이나 파타디 민고네진 두삼 대명고네진 두삼사시오데 오네 털리아 텐데 나오네 시레데요 말와 디메자 슈탐제 규모다부 시바세 동반이 시에서도자 랑고네 주바 매바하거나 단다 랑고네 여바투데 오다 규모나시 또 시레샤세 나오네시 수수 토네시 레메도 삼사 삼루코요라 자취탐제 규모다부 시바 동반이 시바데 녀몬도에 당시 텐데 전달이야 예시무지가라 다심자 맞출라 그나 랑은이 뜨베 동바세데 삼루코나야 녀모께 도우면 도와서 규모다부 시네 녀모 빵그레스 시기도하데 녀모께 빵사 마레스고라 가레스니 규모 빼나 빼샤서 그나 빼샤야 돼 와 규모께 돼 디우다 시싱도 들랑아 캡 아니 미미랑아 캡 아니 멤버십 통주거라 규모게 고라게 주인의 뱀에다 개발해서 같은데 주인의 배 민고 고주거라 어디 주디서 고라한테 뱀에다 뱀행원에 많이 봐 하고 요래서라 고라 주거라 하고 요라 민들들 통주거라 고라게 때 통구요래 규모게 될 고라게 주셔배 뱀에다 뱀에 원에 임be 나와요 말도 셴바요 말 그 하고 요라 땡원에 미 삼사삼을 요 말에 미 최종게 되어 어떤 원에 미신도 삼사 원에 뱀에를 샤삼사 나와요 셴바니가 요라 다 미르가 마gem게 코디 게 제마동게 미신다에네 디우 통그르 마도 게 나와다 셴바니가 요 말아 미숨 통지 고란체 미레 샤바티체 그가제 미 말레비 숨질 통지메다 숨도와 다 계란 최탐제 동반이지 또서는 규모다부 싱그리 규모다부 신수는 녀몬도 그랬어야 돼. 너도 도셔래. 가르선 규모케기 규모에 코라게 tuye de pemengone mayimba hakowe ora ashara hakowe yena ko tu chete chide tingone yena samza kora tagi chende ki samlada chakbe semba kigi ore sigora chazan ko tingone chini 현재 매고르데 교모도 신기래 코라 쪽에 코라르데 현재 기기도와 근데 계란 동반이 검사해야 돼. 떡에 두스 파삼으로 당하지. 경지식이라다 경지식 하나. 소소 셈기 나오지 소유지 아니 파삼으로 당거라. 떡 봤어야 돼. 무슨 도중 원에 전방 원에도 통과하라. 경지식 말해. 원래 담보 되실랍니야.
So here then picking up in the text, we are on verse 30. And so here this presents like a debate sort of. So this begins, and it doesn't say explicitly in the commentary, but it's sort of coming from the mind-only school. They raise this objection to the Madhyamikas. So according to the Prasangika Madhyamikas, nothing is objectively existent or like truly existent in the way that it appears. It appears as though it has this kind of like autonomous existence somehow. So here, when we talk about this, we begin by looking first at the self of the person. This is the best sort of way to initially begin to see this. And then from the seeing of that, you can then see the sort of emptiness of all other things by looking at those different bases. So here it said that things are like illusions. So here I'll read this verse 30. And again, this is sort of the objection raised by the other side. So even if one knows something to be like an illusion, how does this prevent mental distortions? So here, when it comes to seeing things as illusion-like, according to the Prasangika Madhyamika school, we see things as being like really existent, as though they had this kind of objective existent. But when we try to actually search for that thing in the way that it appears to exist, we can't really find it. So here, when it comes to like the person is designated on this body and mind. It's something that is merely dependently designated on the various aggregates, but we don't have this sense of it being something that is merely designated on those aggregates. But we have this sense that there's like an I that really exists somehow like separate from the aggregates. If you were to say set aside form and consciousness and feelings and discrimination and karmic formations, you would be able to find this kind of independent self that's not dependent upon anything else, not contingent upon anything else. And so this is what we mean when we talk about something being able to like bear analysis or withstand analysis. It's like something that you could point to, something you can say that is the self, that is the self of the person. And so when we look through, like go through all of the parts of the body, go through all of the various parts of our mind, our feelings, our discrimination, the karmic formations, there would have to be like something concrete that we could point to within those, but yet we can't find anything within them. If there were some sort of self that were apart from, separate from the aggregates, like separate from our body and mind, then when our body is doing some kind of action, we wouldn't be able to say that the self is doing that. Or when you're having a feeling, you wouldn't be able to say that the self is feeling that. When a thought arises, the self wouldn't be thinking that, because it's somehow like from its own side, existent as something that is not connected to or is separate from those aggregates. And so here, this is the way in which things are like illusions. They appear, all phenomena, as though they have some kind of existence from their own side, true existence, like intrinsic existence, as though they didn't depend upon anything else. But here, recognizing phenomena to be illusion-like means that we see they don't exist as they appear. That's not its actual mode of existence. And so as an example of this, you could think of someone who conjures up an illusion, like a magician. They conjure up illusory men and women and horses and oxen and so forth. And so here, again, to step back, this kind of understanding of things as being illusion-like is in order to avert our afflictions. But here, the sort of objection that is raised is that here, when it comes to like an illusionist who conjures up an illusory woman, that illusionist knows that it's not a real woman. He recognizes that it's just an illusion, but it's not a real woman. But yet he still might have lust for her, thinking like, oh, if that were a real woman, wow, she'd be so pretty. And so here they are saying that like that, even though this conjurer, this illusionist knows something is like an illusion, it doesn't prevent his mental distortions in insofar as he could still feel desire for that, thinking, oh, if that were a real woman, she would be very desirable. So we can see there's sort of three different levels of seeing. Like there's the audience in an illusion where they are like whether it's a stick or a rock or whatever, and the illusionist uses a mantra or some kind of special substance. And so those people's minds are sort of affected by that. So they see the illusion and they also sort of have grasping at that. They don't know that it's an illusion. They don't recognize it as such. And so there's clinging to that illusion. And then there is like people who were not there, not affected by this. So they don't see that appearance of the whatever it is, an illusory woman, and they don't have any sort of grasping at it. And here, then you can have the kind of a situation of the illusionist who has conjured something up. And so there's the appearance, but there's not the grasping at it. So here, it's again, when it comes to, and we'll continue with this sort of point, but when it comes to an understanding of emptiness, we begin by sort of having a conceptual image of this, a mental picture. And that is not the same as a sort of direct realization. So we'll get into this following here. But the objection that's being raised, again, is even if one knows something to be like an illusion, how does this prevent mental distortions? Lust for an illusory woman may arise even in her creator. And so this is the sort of objection raised by those like the mind-only school who say, well, your understanding of what it means for things to be illusion-like, that doesn't seem to get rid of mental distortions, because look at here, there's someone who conjures up an illusory woman, and he still might have this thought of like, oh, she's so desirable. If that were a real woman, she would be so desirable. So this is the kind of objection, and then we'll get into the rebuttal or the response to that.
Nhưng cái tâm chấp thực của họ không có đoạn trừ, cho nên họ vẫn khởi lên cái lòng say mê cô này. Trên các bệ hạng người để nhìn vào cái đối
se o tine shiri se kirangi tongbani komse atia rangwene maduba re samche tunji tsuki mado ko ngusumdo to tindini marwa tunji se o tishi shene yabo jire tokba de zubi yu to de tunji tsuki to se ora tanda kon rana jisemle sha koran drabo jisemle sha ane tele yuni pa tichi ora pena tanda nga zu kechire sherwa nga zu di chilo de shingdong yore si chi yore si shebe na kane labsu na o sampe shingdong ge tunji di semle sha gira ngusum de jine ko mi ngusum do tongir ma do de tan parche ne tong marwa shingde tona ngusum de koran chemba koran le me koran chang ma tongira tokba le ke je shesna ore de shingdong chi yutne pando shingdong yor te motra yore samtan de semle chagdo ngusum ine te til don ma do toye yo mara sakora ranchemba koran na biora ti yone tongure ti mane tongu mara megi sheba na sheba ne sheba che sheba lui ji sheba to zo tender shire to ta yi ji sheba de le tokba yore wang she to zo le tokba yo mara tongme ji sheba sere tokba mai ge sheba chare yi ji sheba de le tokba yore tongme yore tokba se de o dana je kora nyema to de dana de ji sem ji cha o tender ji ti sigre sam sing ye sam yaga loma ta jeba te ye samje tunjile juni so da kan ji chula juni so ra kan de ji she de ji ku do nga jo kan de ji she go ra pumba se ra kawa se mota se lapsona namsa sem char ge do sem cha de mota ngone marwa mota ngone re de ga mar mota ngone ne so yese de mota ngone yo ra takin chilo de motor chiyo na o te motor ti yo samsa kani nge motor te yo sina semli chagdwa tanda motor di shanda zil chin yu na ko ti chaam gure motor kujo jamu kujo jabu tinde ke tongu mara sem tokpa liya o motor tinde chiyo sam ti so tokpa ka pa soyo shabe nawa chira tengi chire tena motor ngone tege drabu chin drana ji so semli chane tilen jiyo ne eni pa o motor tinde chiyo 미치 명지라서 미치 텐데시 선파 생기도와 틀에 똑바시 거래 칸에 깨지셔도 될랍 거래 나와도야 해줘 거래 지지지지지 쓰도 잘수단 거래 그 나와도야 샤줘 거래 이는 가지고 것들에 깨지셔 지지 텐데시 거래 자 다이왕게 주바스 등지왕게 주바스 무슨 도저 라체바라 뭐베 왕게 주바스 세웠다 Koran chu number 10 ni chugura tokpa de chu number 10 ke su pa su ne ne te sa samgidwa hotel number tokpa se te pa samla ta ya rich musum de ne ran sem ba ko su kadul tongge de se wara o te chilam ne keba chale tham.
So here again, the mind-only school is saying that this kind of understanding of emptiness or things as being illusory that is posited by the Prasangika Madhyamikas is not necessary or efficacious because in the sense of like an illusionist who conjures up an illusory woman, he still might feel a desire for her. So here we need to sort of think about this and understand that this understanding of emptiness at this point is something that is conceptual, that involves, and we use different terms in English, but either a generic image or a mental image. So here, when one is first beginning to understand emptiness or what it is for something to not be established from its own side, not existent in that way, we have to rely upon this kind of mental image. We have to use conceptuality. So here, this is sort of like when we have a generic image or a mental image, this is like sort of having a likeness called up in our head. So if we say, for example, like, oh, there's a tree outside and you're describing it, there's an image of that tree that comes into your mind. It's a mental image, a mental kind of picture. When we see things with our senses, like with our visual consciousness, we actually see that tree, we see it sort of in its complete sort of its own character. We see that object directly. There's no sort of intermediary there. So our sense powers and our sense consciousnesses, that are based on those sense powers, so like our visual consciousness and so forth, are non-conceptual. They don't rely upon a mental image, whereas our mental consciousness can be either non-conceptual or conceptual. So when we say something like pillar or pot or car, there's an image, a likeness that arises in your mind. It's not as though there's an actual car there. When you think car, it's not like it has to be right there. Rather, it's an image that is made by the mind. Or you think like, oh, this person, and an image is pulled up in your mind. This is what we are talking about with conceptuality. You rely upon those mental images. So there's a likeness that appears in your head. This is something that is relying upon a symbol or relying upon a mental picture, not sort of like nakedly perceiving the object in the way that we do with direct perceptions with our sense consciousnesses, but rather conceptual thought involves this kind of mental image, sometimes translated as generic image, or like a mental picture of something. So like when we say a word and you recollect that object or you think of that object, a likeness or a picture comes into your head. This is the way that our conceptuality works.
ngone mare mire jishane ngone maro soso ti ngeme den rabu cha der mato ngusum thoye ne ko thonde ne ko karchena kadu thonde ramede mene thoye ke yo marto uti diko ti ngone mare dana sin dana ngeme den rabu re soso sembi so ente cha yora ngema bene kambachi ye te shingdong rab che chi yo na ta tanda shingdong de che sa mena ya kambatel tinde chi yo sam ko samutane shingdong ngema na shi yo mara tanda ko che sa kanga cha sa re te nga de ke che re she te ore te cha tung se poba de yo sam te yora chi ge poba de pa kina ge semle ke mi ma tong ba de ke ba yo mara te de yo sam sem ge sam de do ko ne mare ngusum de jen do thon de ni pa ji pa kina chu shan na kanga thon de do nang de ngone de re do ra tok ba dus na de tunji sigra tanda ngone ten rabu chin da na chin sa ga re me ngone de mare ta ne ga ra zo ngone yin be so ro che che shena ki da ka bu yo ya da ten de so yo go ra de tin yam do ngone me ngone te da su tre de so che sam ta za yo go ra ma ze me ngone te de yo mare ti re ta tin na ko ka so was ne kiran tong ba ni se de ma she ne te ba she sam ba she ne tin ji su ji do do wa she so sem ji ba te de yin sa tong ba sa ra ma do pe ngu sum gi tong na shi tong ba she ra ni nyomo do to ma re she te ge pa nyomo ke ba re ba wa she ba ra o ti chu chu ba she ra kuma da bu she na ya sin do so te da nyomo do ba ju den do ma re she kanzi kume peme la peme nye jan chaki gyuru sede kira pechani su lao songa o tiji lamna ya tatila pa lenja wara uma ba tiji ya.
So here, when it comes to conceptual thought, then it's not the actual thing. It's something like that thing. So when we see something directly to our sense consciousnesses, we see that actual object, the actual thing that is there. Like if we're outside and we see a tree or we see a house. But if when it comes to conceptual thought and the kind of mental image, this is something that the mind makes. Like we could think about something that was there in the past, like, oh, by this house there was this tree, and that tree, we can still see that picture can still come up in our mind, even if that is long gone. So when it comes to this kind of mental image, sometimes generic image is the word used, it's not the actual thing, but when we pull that sort of likeness into our mind, we can give rise to all kinds of feelings. Like if there's someone that we dislike and we pull that into our mind, we can feel like, oh, that we're really angry toward them and so forth. So here, when it comes to conceptual thought, it involves this use of a mental image, not the actual object. So like if I think about this mug that's here, like it could get moved all around, but my image of that mug is just there. It's still there. So the kind of mind-only school, again, is saying, well, this realization, this understanding of things as being illusion-like, that doesn't have the ability to reverse our afflictions or get rid of our afflictions, because lust for an illusory woman may arise even in her creator. So that's the kind of objection, and then there will be the response to that, the rebuttal to that.
Nên khi ở đây nói Trung Quán duy thức tranh biện với Trung Quán, nó giống như khi mà cho đến khi nào bạn không thấy được trực tiếp cái hình về tính không thì bạn không có thể loại bỏ được phiền não. Ví như là một người
Sana o ta di ba sa wa ka sa to pa le je tu ka ri cha go se tang bo o kume peme tu ge te kuma khen so ra kuma khen ge kume peme tu go tu na ya de le ko shen ja nyomo man do ba chu sen yo re se ti che che ra ti she go ra tang bo kuran se na she o de kuma khen ge kume peme ya ani shen ja men do be Mendo caresti che sen sceglie, no, dogma rese, nyomo dogma re, chi rese ora, ti chi che sen caresana. De nyomo de do cosa, te che pa ne shecha las. Kuma pe me trungengi, kuma kente so, te che basana, kuma tuba bo, kuma cheba bo te sora. Kuma kente sora, te che pa ne shecha las, kuma pe me te las. Tatrina, panatrina, potrina, caritrina, te da terzo, che mi permette la sora, ya, te ci pane, sceja la se, che mi kibute la serce, nyomo pasha, ma pambes, che mi permette la co nyomo, chagwa di chonsa Japan yo mare, tenzi di chonsa Japan yo mare sora, ma banza con nyomo chegre sora, tena, te tonga te se, Kusen tena, kuma ken tege, kume peme tongana, o tengo ne yina samsa, atende shenja kegre se ware, Nyamu Paksha Mapambe, Nyamu Paksha Chungse Japan Yomar, Nyamu Chungse Japan Yomare Sigora, Tinzi Chungse Jakoke, Kujote Yomare, Payomare se. Tena Tetonana Tese, Chumake, Chume Peme Toana Sigora, Tetonana Te, Tetonana Te, Tony Paksha Nyamchunis, Tongbani Paksha de Nyamchunde, Neba Haja Chunju Resigora, Tesonzako, Nyamu Chigre Sigora.
Anh nên Trung Quán đã trả lời như
So
sau.
here then, in this response to that kind of objection, it begins with, well, there's a reason why for an illusionist, even though he realizes that the, say, woman that he has conjured up is just an illusion, that still has not sort of reversed all of his afflictions or eliminated all of his afflictions. And so here, this then explains the reason in the next verse of 31. So it says, for that creator, meaning the one who has conjured up the illusion, the instincts of mental distortions toward objects have not been eliminated. So here specifically toward that sort of horse or oxen or say a beautiful woman that he has conjured up, he has not abandoned the kind of grasping at that because the instincts of mental distortions toward objects have not been eliminated. And here that really means that he hasn't eliminated in the slightest this grasping at true existence. So as long as one has this grasping at true existence, then the sort of imprints of realizing emptiness are quite weak. Therefore, we will continue to give rise to the various afflictions. So here again, because this person who has conjured up this illusion has not gotten rid of those. Oh.
Tashe Zabasura. Milia Joyona Nima Taravindama Sayam Botongiora. Tashe Zanagi Mishisura. Milia Rabri Joyona. And then they said within the touch of Buddha within the Chunjudrama Sara Tongiora. The Koranga Haku Yore, poor member the Haku Yore. Tanzaba Maimba the Haku Yore Kansade. Yina ko Tashe Zabwe Tuba the members Retogio Mare. The Tuba member Karja or some Migi Nazade. Maybe so soon as she net in Trashes up with the Mabry Rigomado. Kohako, some year, Trashes up with me, some Koranga Guyare. Not me, I will make starting to Tonte do some 20 when a member Kohako, your richer. Hakonaya, Trashes up with 20 or 2 days, Tuna Yungure. The triple doma so answer, Hakonaya. So Hako Yorde. Triple double carriers and make it read the secret. Rabri de says on it. Passions what the Mabel Tona show them and do Yabucha so some. What in this tribute in the was over it. Did you love me?
So here, when it comes to this illusionist, even though he sort of knows that this is a mistaken appearance or is sort of like a basis of error, we can think about it as like there's still going to be the sort of predispositions toward our various afflictions. It's kind of similar, like until you get rid of the source of that error, in this case, the grasping at things as truly existent, you can't eliminate the kind of appearance of that. So here, when you have like someone that has an eye disease, wherein it looks like there's sort of hairs falling, they might know that this is an eye disease, but so long as they still haven't eliminated that eye disease, you're going to have the appearance of falling hairs. So even though they know that they're mistaken, they know that those are not actual sort of hairs falling, they see that because the source of error is still there.
Number to the Mishira, Tomi Shivasur, Togamaro, Mishi the Trudegora, Mishi Trashan Sabatonguare, member Haku, you are the Tandako, Chunandi Tedek to Mevchama Swasire, Tomi Trishirwa. That Toba Trushi, Pena Sarabe Ruberechi, and the Tagwa Trindabre Tadashi, Twas Sade, and the Konamsa all day to do some shigra, to do some koshigre. Simply Toba to do some shigra, Tabade, Trindabusonza, Sebishirame, Sarubri, Rabri Sonza, Koshigira. And the Koyabuchi Teje, could you get my Susaka, Tagwa in Baha Kosona, Namsa Troubadour Dure, oh, did you do some Namsa Troubadour Dure? Sakoti, Togba Trishire, Tambuko, Tagwalia, True the True, True Nashi, Yi Shibadegi, oh, did you do some Koshere? Oh, share it, and it could. Thoughts of Teach substitute could you get the Jamudute, thoughts of Ten, the Tawarido, and one had do something. And I go Taki to do some sort of Tawa Trudun Zimbe, Lotin Dondo, Namsa Mavachagres, Kohako Wadaga, Chiba Yimba, Norimba, Hako Wadaga, no Jubi Shiba, the Namsa Dondo, Tindriche or Echere, Tichilana.
So here, when it comes to sort of erroneous consciousnesses, mistaken consciousnesses, we can have those that are like non-conceptual. Like in the case of an eye disease, there's a problem with that eye consciousness. And so even though, say conceptually, you know that there's no hairs falling, because it's a sort of non-conceptual, the visual consciousness has that error. You can't reverse that error just by knowing, like having a conceptual understanding that you don't have actual falling hairs. So you can also have sort of conceptual mistaken minds. Like in the case of, say, when it's sort of dark and the lighting's not very good and we see a coiled up rope and we think that, oh my God, there's a snake. That kind of perception is reverted. I mean, when we think that there's a poisonous snake there, we give rise to fear and all of those kinds of things. But if we sort of get closer and we see like, oh, that thing's not moving. Oh, that's not actually a snake. That's just a coiled up rope. That understanding, that certainty that that thing is just a rope eliminates the kind of mistaken perception of it being a snake and the subsequent fear that comes with that. So there are those types of wrong consciousnesses that can be averted through a conceptual understanding, like that kind of mistaking a striped rope for a snake, that immediately upon realizing that you can eliminate those. Whereas there are also those that are not instantaneously eliminated in that way. Like, for example, our sort of non-conceptual mistaken visual consciousness, until that source of error is removed, we can't eliminate the appearance of those falling hairs.
Có một cái loại ảo giác mà qua cái ý thức của mình á, mà nó khi mình biết được cái sự thật là nó không phải là cái con rắn thì
When I sit down, something Rawa do Truba, Toanashi, when I hear something temperature barwa, Toanashi, Temba, when I hear something Betinzidua, or Dinziding around the Julia, but the Toma de Sanjake see your Marishera, but Toma Mevanegora, Dinzidi, Kyola Toma Yomara, to Kyo Tambu didn't go to the detail, like Kyo Yomara, Sechi Yomare, Tingama, Kyola Toma Mesura, Toma Yomare. Something I go Toma Mevaniore, Toma de Sanjake, Yatsen, see your Marisura, Tambu Dinere, Shaditalia, the Minduseci Yomara, Nambelucin or the Kyola Toma Yomare, Kansaka Jundil Toma Yomare, Jideng come to Toma Yomare, Jideng come to Kasha Saba Jigi, Tindici Degra, Tambuchi and Zambulin Dirib Chashana, that Tambu Namgo Tombache Melche. Internet to train to the Suru Yacha, and the Misha Tondusate, Tomayora, dear Chaya de Tomayora. Zamulindin Dili Chaya de Tomaramado. Titalia, Simjan to the Tita Likyo or Tita Kyoyora. Chizanko, me juji danzi disora, nga samsa nga rawa truba, rawine truba na nashi, ye samsange, samluti sura. Pe toma meba ne yore sura. Sanje geti toma se yomares. Jakon drini nga zo drida re shene pe, cheba nashi, tenzi ya cheba nashi. Re jiba choi jeba nashi, pet pa chode yore sura. Tili atene, jinde chi shukshenpa shivabate, dami tokpa tsamje, namsa meba chaya yomare sura. Dami ba tingshi suju tohne, teba che, samba che tohne, namsa pa paksha de cheba, paya de pasha ne, tingshi kora ngunju de tanda meba sotu ma re chera. Kumidi cho de shuksheda shun. Isun dati temban meba hakone tokpe tohna ya, namsa daga ti meba tingshi meba chaya mara, yane yandu kum kora. O tisun dati tingshi sabyo de cheba de paya pasha pangi mare, tingshi kora en do toku ma re chera. Ta yina, ti mogo da, ta meba ngusumdu to suna sigora. Ta meba ngusumdu to, thonlam ya kom takbari shi kom chade, paru chir. Pha samlu ta mogo che, lo koran su, tongsan ya shayong gore, tete te samlu chande. Titi ngusumdu to gore, yiji sheba ke ngusumdu to ya yore. Ta meba ngusumdu to ne pakbe kansa ke, thonlam sede rwa. Thonlam se, pakbe lam, thonlam sede. Ta meba ngusumdu to me lam keba yina ya, 당진 딜행기디 맵소투 요마레스 단다 요레스 오라 군다디 맵소투레 주세 삼루타나 어디 여반다 삼사 디타 또고 맵차그라 어디 매다 탁조레 샤삼 급대왕게 쪼다바 인제 군다다 헬게스니 요라 군다스데 치르바다 다 요바켈링게 쪼다 요레 다 매나 다 라완도 투바시 매나 에네 께와 통만 매나 컨디션 그래 심마 컨디션 도그래 रावे ताचोरे सोकोदे तोस्तोस जुर्गे मादो तादे जुरो यो मारे ताकवा राव रेसे तिंदे समग्योरा कसोरे ने ट्रुवा योरे ताकवा रे रंग ने ट्रुवा योरे से कुसे समलताने ताकवा मैंने केवा गामादे छिमा थारबा थोबा ताते जो योंग मारे से tintre ko ne ta rawa du truba yore se ne tangzi kunda se wartela shukchembu pe rigba samlutani ko ye samdware ta chida meli tintre memba che lo hengi na la tondru yaje li ha yorwa nga sa nga razu trude lo ga ma sa nga razu kyule nga samsa nga rawa truba jimba lo do tela hengi se wore tinzi hengi nga shukji kumdi ko nga ke yorma do te yeban rase kusen samlutani ke ko yo mare kuna rangshin ki yo deora tele tangzin henje sigora tongba ningu sumdu to suna tangzi kunda de pang ru re chere ta ribe ko ne samlutani tinde de pe sabun de chaba ko pang ru re henje de tanda yong yo re tongba ningu sumdu to we kap tele yong yo maru ma do ya che to de pang ru suna pang ru chu ru mile ke ji she de ya henje de le yong yo ra o ti sonja ko lam 사탕보 사니보 사주보 남베 사추스제 ene 상게 셰기도아 배 곰곰곰네 당질행게데 네바 총총총총야 곰곰곰 아니 제마데 상게데 사게바 토스네 당질행게데 방도레 시거라 어디질람나 다도 망버트
So here, this kind of grasping at true existence, again, or like grasping at a self, grasping at this kind of self as existing in the way that it appears. This is something that has no beginning. So when we talk about the self or this world, as well as our sort of innate ignorance, there's no way to posit a beginning. Even the Buddha could not posit a beginning to the sort of continuity of an I, there's no beginning beginning to the continuity of a person. We can talk about like the beginning of this specific life and so forth. And so too, when it comes to like the external world, the universe, we can talk about the sort of beginning of this particular world, when there was a period of emptiness and then it came into being and so forth. But the beginning of this entire universe, that's not something that we can posit. It's beginningless. And so too, when it comes to this thought of an I, we have had this since beginningless time. We're like utterly familiarized with it, sort of like engulfed in it. And so it's very difficult to immediately eliminate this kind of grasping at a self, grasping at an I, grasping at true existence. So it's not as though one sort of conceptual understanding of that has the ability to get rid of that kind of grasping that we are so familiar with since beginningless time. But rather it is by meditating on it again and again and again that we are able to increase the strength of that understanding. And eventually the kind of conceptual understanding that we have will become a direct realization. So when one attains what is called the superior's path of seeing, one has a first direct realization of emptiness, where it's only that sort of vivid, clear emptiness without any sort of duality, and one becomes an Arya being. But at that point, at the path of seeing, even though one has had that direct realization of emptiness, that is not able to eliminate the kind of innate grasping at true existence. It can get rid of the kind of intellectually acquired grasping at a self. Like, say, when based upon philosophical tenets, we think that, oh, there must be some kind of permanent, unitary, independent self that travels from life to life. Otherwise, there couldn't be past and future lives, or there couldn't be karma. So those kinds of assertions that are backed by logic and reasoning, using these kinds of various views of philosophical schools, these kinds of intellectually acquired or sort of artificial graspings are eliminated at the point of that path of seeing, that initial direct realization of emptiness. But one still has that kind of innate sense of an I. This sense of an I, this grasping at true existence of self and phenomena that is innate, is something that exists even in animals, even in those who are not capable of logic and reasoning. There's no need for reasoning. It's something that is innate to all of us. We sort of naturally have it arising. And so that first direct realization of emptiness is able to eliminate those kinds of intellectually acquired or fabricated sorts of grasping. But in the period of subsequent attainment, so when one is in that direct sort of meditative equipoise on emptiness, one won't have that kind of innate grasping either. But you get up in the periods of subsequent attainment, and that kind of grasping will come back. But then proceeding through the various paths and grounds, so beginning with the path of seeing, we have the first ground, and with those 10 grounds, over time, one is reducing slowly the strength of that innate grasping at true existence. And on the 8th ground, one fully eliminates the kind of that manifest grasping at true existence, although its sort of seeds or predispositions remain. But it is in this way that one sort of proceeds in a sequence from that first direct realization of emptiness that is able to overcome or eliminate our our intellectually acquired grasping at true existence, graspings. And then it is through the sort of development of that eventually one is able to eliminate that innate grasping at true existence.
Cái đó đoạn trừ được ở khi nào mình chứng vào cái kiến đạo, hiện chứng tính không. Nhưng mà cái câu sinh ngã chấp, cái chấp mà bản năng, cái vốn căn để của nó rất là khó đoạn trừ đó, cái nó trở thành một cái sức mạnh rất là tự động, nó phát khởi một cách tự động, không cần nỗ lực gì cả, lúc nào nó cũng hiện khởi lên một cách rõ ràng á.
chilama tu ka soda dage ko tu kuma ke de kume peme de peme mai ba to re de tanda shenja ki re sera ki kera tongba ni de ke peng me do se la ro de tongba ni ko ke ke do yo ma de kume peme mai ba to de ro kume peme su pe chi peme ba nang de chora tele kume peme se re da kume peme se de ti peme ngone mai ba te to yo de ti tongba ni ko la ke do yo ma de ngaji pena melona ge cheshin ge somye se gra melona pata suno sosu tong de phajo de tong de gra melona ge cheshin ge somye de cheshin mare tong ne mare se ti to gyo ra ti tong ba ni ke ji ke mare melona ge cheshin ge somye de tong ne yi bare tong gra ku jo jab je kha tu ya de tong ba ro che so tu de che jab lo le ji tong ba yo bare tong do ke 그 제신 손님들 제신 원에 말와 동원에 말와 미군에 말와 원에 인베서를 구조 겹치체 동기와라 내 민원에 들어야 말아 제신의 손님 제신도 매된 봐서라 그 동반이 빨리 샤위와래 나와나 시템바요 말에 빼나 멜로나 제신 손님 제신도 나기도 와서 나와나 시고 제신 동원에 말와서 빼레마도 그 동반이 또 거기에 놓여 말아 동반이 원에 또 그네 송예 고라데 이게 송예 줘라 송예 때 랑원에 들어가 나게 와대 때 랑원에 들어가 말을 삼도나 아니 동이 또 그잘 누려라 동반이 잘 다게데 좀에 뱀에데 나와나시 템바 말에서 지다고 되게 지나와래 인도 거기서나고 나와나시 텐데 소소스 미시다 때서 소나마도 원에 되게 좀에데 제가 돈에 라요 말을 삼나 동반이 잘 누려라 맞아 주메 뱀에 많이 봐 또바데 동반이 고하게 누려 말아 나라도 멜로나가 제신의 손에 그 미디 미 많이 봐 또바나시라 이게 동반이 개말 동반이는 피가 손에 빼 인도 가고 시에도 그저 접지 시에도 어디 근데 척발을 때네래 마도 척발이 피가 그래서네 라요 말아 근데 삼르다나니 동반이 또 배차라 동반이 초를 누려라 저다기 그런 주메 뱀에 많이 봐도나 세디 티도나 케이티가 말에 멜로나 제신성에 미 말에 되게 리무티샤디 민원에 말에 세니 스토리 티동반이 된다게 누려 말에 자고 되게 그거지 존나야지 게 그요 말와 어디 가가지고 오라 기치서나 엔드
So here, where again we are talking about how, like how someone who conjures up an illusory woman could still feel a sort of lust or desire for that woman. Here, his realization that that illusory woman is not an actual woman, that realization doesn't go toward understanding emptiness. It's not just like, for example, if we see that we use a mirror and we see the reflection of our face in a mirror, we can know that that reflection is not an actual face. Like it moves, we can use that in order to make up our face or put something on or whatever. But it's not as though the recognition that that reflection is not an actual face goes toward the understanding of emptiness. Rather, these things are used as an example of something that appears in one way, but doesn't actually exist in the way that it appears. So again, to see like a face existing in a mirror, that reflection of a face is not an actual face. To realize that is not going toward that understanding of emptiness. But to see like, oh, that reflection is actually dependent upon many sort of things coming together. And if you search for what that actual reflection is, there's nothing that you can point to, but rather that is something that is merely sort of an appearance dependent upon causes and conditions coming together. Like if you look for that reflection, you can't find a truly existent reflection. Well, that goes toward the understanding of emptiness. So here again, when we talk about these things, we need to distinguish between an understanding that an illusory woman is not an actual woman, and using that as an example of saying like an illusion is something that appears in one way, but doesn't actually exist in that way. And so too, all phenomena appear to be existent in their own right, from their own side, like objectively, but they don't actually exist in that way. So when we come to that kind of an understanding, that's leading us towards an understanding of emptiness. But just to stay at the level of like, oh, well, a face, the reflection of a face in a mirror is not an actual face. That understanding isn't getting us closer to emptiness, or saying, oh, I realize that this illusory woman is not an actual woman. That's not going toward the understanding of emptiness. But these are used as examples of something that appears in one way, but doesn't exist in that way. So that's good for today. We'll stop there.
Let's do a short mandala offering and dedicate our merits. First time English, second time Vietnamese, third time Tibetan. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Mặt đất này được trang nghiêm với dầu thơm và trải đầy hoa, tô điểm với núi Tu Di, tứ đại bộ châu, mặt trời và mặt trăng. Con tưởng tượng nơi đây là cõi Phật và xin cúng dường. Nguyện tất cả chúng sinh được an hưởng cõi tịnh độ này. Sa di phô kỳ trước sinh mê tôn ram, nguyện lên xây mê đề ngang qua đi, sở yên sinh tu mê đề hoa yi, rồi năng sinh la châu hoa sông. Yi đam guru Vietnam Pandita Niriya Taya Ni. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Nhờ nương công đức các thiện hạnh này, nguyện con sớm thành tựu quả vị của Đức Phật Bổn Sư và dẫn dắt tất cả chúng sinh không chừa sót một ai vào quả vị giác ngộ. So you do nay, you May the supreme jewel Bodhisattva that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminished, but increase more and more. Nguyện cho ngọc quý tối cao Bồ Đề Tâm, nơi nào chưa phát triển sẽ nảy sinh lớn mạnh, nơi nào đã phát triển sẽ tăng trưởng không giảm mà tăng thêm mãi mãi. Chẳng chụp xâm châu quyền phong chế mà kê bà năm kê chủ chi kê hoa năm ba mê ba yam tăng đây rồi đi. May we dedicate these merits to all mother sentient beings, including ourselves and all others. May we all complete the Buddha path and achieve the Buddhahood. Nguyện đam mơ không được này, về khắp con để vâng chúng sinh đều chốn thành Phật đạo. Thank you, Pandita. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Geshe-la. Thank you, Geshe-ma. Thank you, Ms.Katrina Brooks. Good night, Rinpoche. Good night, Pandita. Yes. Yeah, bye-bye. Bây giờ mình đứng lên bài Phật Thánh Thủy.